And I am Clint Waltz, Turfgrass Specialist here at the University of Georgia, located on the Griffin campus. I have turfgrass responsibilities statewide for all areas of turf. That's landscape, sports fields, golf courses, and sod production. So I get to see an awful lot, and I get to see a lot in our landscapes, that kind of where turf works in and how it works within as a component of our landscape. Some folks ask, why turf? Some folks aren't a big fan of turf, but turf does serve a purpose within our landscape. It's a permanent vegetative cover that helps hold soil and prevent erosion, protects water quality out there. This is a picture of, we kind of viral amongst us turfgrass eggheads here a few years ago on Twitter. And counterpart up at Virginia Tech took this during a rainstorm just to illustrate the benefits of turf. And you can see a slope to the right, and part of it has a juniper hedge on it, and part of it has a turf hedge. I assume that's probably Kentucky bluegrass in Blacksburg, Virginia. And you notice the water quality coming off of those two systems. The water coming through or underneath that juniper hedge is muddy, full of sediment, which will make it into a storm sewer and eventually a creek or a stream or a river. Whereas the water coming off the turf is clean, and it appears to be less water coming off of it as well. So the more water is infiltrating, making its way into the soil into the soil, into the reserve that the turf and trees and other ornamentals in that landscape can use whenever it starts to dry out a little bit. So turf does serve a environmental purpose out there, as well as it kind of helps within the landscape, just setting off different colors and that kind of thing on it. So next slide. So Mary Carroll touched on a little bit, and it applies to turf as well, but right plant, right place is a very common mantra within horticulture as well as within the turf industry out there as well. We have various species of turf, and you've got to put the right one in the right place to expect it to do as it's supposed to. You put the wrong plant in the wrong place, the inputs will go up dramatically. And light is one of those things that needs to be considered. Not all turf species handle light the same way. Bermuda grass, for example, is a warm season species that really prefers 8 hours or better of uninterrupted sun a day during the growing season. So to put it underneath a limited light environment or a shade environment, kind of like what we see in this picture right here, while from a distance it looks fine, it's actually, if you look at it a little bit closer, next slide, we got a close-up of this. Because of the low light, the Bermuda grass here has stretched, it's opened up, and you can see down to the soil surface itself. So that limited light has changed the morphological characteristics of that turf. It's longer, it's thinner, it has a low density of leaf blades, its vertical habit or growth habit is more vertical and upright. You get down a little bit closer or into the plant itself, its cell walls tend to be thinner. It has a thinner cuticle, which makes it more susceptible to disease and insect penetration. There's decreased lateral growth, so we're not covering that soil surface as well. You run the risk of losing some of that soil under heavy rainfall or situations. And we have an increased shoot to root ratio, which means we got a few more shoots and less roots to help hold that turf or even bring it back from periodic points of stress, whether it's a pest stress or whether that's environmental stress like drought or heat on it. So putting the wrong plant in the wrong place, while it may look as if it's doing okay, you really are stressing that grass and not getting the true benefits that you would have on the turf itself. Next slide, please. So maturing landscapes. And again, Mary Carroll touched on this. There's many landscapes that are being built out there right now, and trees and shrubs and other ornamentals are being put in, as well as new sod being laid. And folks have to remember that landscapes will mature. And I see this quite frequently. There's a problem. Thank you. Yes, go ahead and do that. I'll see this problem in landscapes very frequently, is that I will hear, I had the best looking centipede grass 15 years ago. Well, you may have had the best looking centipede grass in the neighborhood 15 years ago, but that maple tree, in this case on that back right here, was very small, allowed a lot of air and a lot of light through, and as a result that centipede did fine. But as that landscape matured, that maple tree, or in the case of this front here, this ligustrum, not ligustrum, crepe myrtle, Um, it's matured, its canopy has come out, there's more leaves, there's more roots, and the competition for light, water, space, and nutrients has gone up, and the trees will always win when it comes to turf for light, water, space, and nutrients. So the microclimate has changed and will change with time. Likewise, those trees will cast more shade, and as they do, those grasses will respond. Next slide, please. So some turf grass in the shade, some impacts here. It's not just light, water, space, and nutrients as those canopies thin and open up, but it's air drainage. Those trees get up, those leaves come on those trees, prevent air from moving through the landscapes. Air drainage is a term maybe most of you aren't familiar with, but it's a matter of moving air and restricting air movement through a landscape. And that affects things like disease. So when grasses get diseased, they open up. When they open up, the next thing that will follow is weeds or opportunistic plants. So we restrict air movement. We increase the opportunity for disease because there's less air to dry the canopy out. The turfgrass canopy thins out, it opens up, and we have more opportunity for weeds to come in. As I said earlier, turf will always lose whenever it comes to competition for light, water, space, and nutrients. Those surface roots that you see there coming from the trees and the other ornamentals on those, they're right there at the surface, and they will outcompete turf every time. And I'm sure when this landscape was put in 10 or 15 years prior, that there was plenty of air movement, plenty of air drainage, and the St. Augustine grass in this case did just fine. But as that live oak matured and the others surrounding it that you can't really see, and the surface roots are right there, the grasses responded, and as a result, you have less turf, and it has thinned out with time. Next slide, please. Other impacts, are examples. I mentioned disease, and it's not always just the trees themselves, but anytime you restrict air movement, here in this case, we've got a good situation of large patch on zoysia grass. You don't see any trees, you see plenty of sunshine on that grass, so hey, shouldn't be a problem. But notice the fence there. That fence is doing a real good job of restricting air movement and preventing that particular lawn from drying out, staying excessively wet. Now, the homeowners had something to do there too, where they're overrunning their irrigation system. But overrun the irrigation system, not allow it to dry out during the course of the day, and you wind up running into a disease issue. Next slide, please. And just another example here, you wind up seeing we got a good bit of shade. This is on St. Augustine grass, and large patch can be a significant issue here too. But here, this is probably a little bit of stress from the shade, as well as reduced air movement, reduced sunlight, and the St. Augustine grass is going to have a hard time staving off any of the disease that comes along with this. Next slide. So, which turfgrass species take some shade? Which ones to think about? I've had several trials here in Griffin where we've actually planted grass underneath what I refer to as a heavy hardwood shade. And you can kind of see my plot set up here. And if the left-hand side is south, so the sun will track from the left-hand side of the photograph all the way to the background of the photograph on it. And it will wind up staying in the shade most of the day, but it gets like most landscapes, dappled intermittent sun throughout the day. And we've planted a number of species in there through the years. Bermuda grass, various cultivars of Bermuda grass, zoysia grass, St. Augustine grass, tall fescue, centipede grass as well. So what I've come up with is some general recommendations or guidelines to think about which grasses and which cultivars you might have based on the amount of sunlight that you get on your landscape during the growing season. So for warm season grasses, our growing season in Georgia is going to pretty much be April, first or middle of April through, let's just say, 1st of October or so. We still can have very conducive conditions South Georgia beyond that, but that's just kind of a general guideline right in there for our growing season. So of our Bermuda grasses, most of them need about 8 hours of filtered to intermittent sun a day. And let me say too, I'll back up on our warm season grasses like Bermuda grass and centipede grass and St. Augustine grass and zoysia grass, they all grow just fine in full sun. They prefer full sun, but some of them can handle limited light environments. Tifgray, an example, Bermuda grass, can take down to about 6 hours of filtered to intermittent sun. below 6 hours, it starts to lose what I refer to as its commercial acceptability. It's still there. It doesn't just disappear once we get to 6 hours or less. It's there, but it opens up, it thins out. It's not what we consider commercially acceptable. Likewise, centipede grass, whether it's tifblare or common, I would take it down no less than 6 hours of filtered to intermittent sun. And of the zoysia grasses, zenith zoysia grass kind of falls in that 6 hours or better of filtered to intermittent sun that it needs. We do have two Bermuda grasses that can handle a little bit more limited light than say Tif Grand. Tif Tough and Celebration are both grasses that seem to do well down to about 5 hours of filtered to intermittent sun. Again, they are optimal at full sunlight, 8 hours plus a day, but they can handle some limited light environments on those. St. Augustine grass, again, that one will go down to about 5 hours. We have two cultivars, and everything I'm listing here are grasses that are commercially available in the state of Georgia. Raleigh and Palmetto are the two St. Augustine grasses, although in limited production, but those are two grasses that are in production. Zoysia grass is a species that is a little bit more shade tolerant than some of our other warm season species. Grasses that will wind up doing well: El Toro, Palisades, Jammer, Empire, Geo, Xeon, and Zorro are examples of ones that can get down to about 4 hours of filtered to intermittent sun. Less than 4 hours, again, these grasses don't just disappear out of the landscape, but they don't hold their quality. And in turf, we're a quality business. It has to look good, it has to be green, it has to grow and function. No one brags about having the brownest yard in the neighborhood, right? So these grasses, they're going to maintain acceptable commercial acceptability at 4 hours or better. And again, if we're at full 8 hours of sun, these grasses will perform just well, just fine. In anything less than 4 hours, tall fescue can maintain some of that in certain parts of the state. Griffin is as far south as I would recommend planting tall fescue. And even then, that can be a bit of a challenge. So tall fescue is going to handle shade environments a little bit better than our warm season. Excuse me, I should back up. The tall fescue is a cool season species. So it's not well adapted for the entire state. And even then, it's marginally adapted for, say, Atlanta North. But it does have some better shade tolerance. Next slide, please. So let's talk about a little bit of maintenance. So if you do have grass in the shade, what can some things you do to encourage the grass such that it actually performs and does better? One is raise your mowing height to the upper recommended range. Provide as much surface area for that grass leaf blade to expand, capture as much sun energy as it can, photosynthesize as best as it can. So raise your mowing height. So if the mowing height, for example, for zoysia grass is 1 to 2 inches, in the shade, you might be in that 1.5 to 2 inch range, or 1 3/4 to 2 inch range. So a little bit taller. Maybe the front yard's full sun, the backyard shade. Front yard, you drop the mowing height down 1 to 1.5. Backyard, maybe you're 1 3/4 to 2. So you're trying to get that leaf blade as long as possible so that you can intercept as much sunlight as possible. Fertility. Under limited light environments, grass isn't going to grow as vigorous as it would out in the full sun. So it doesn't need to be fed as much. So you can lower your fertility in it. So go to the low end of your recommended range. So for example, again, I'll use zoysia grass where we say 1 to 2 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square foot per year. In that backyard scenario I was just giving you where you've got shade, you need maybe half as much nitrogen in the back as you might in the front where you're getting full sun. Pest management. You're likely to have increased pest pressure as a result of limited light. You are stressing this plant. So it's in an environment where it's doing the best it can, is competing with under limited light, and is competing for light, water, space, and nutrients with the roots of the surrounding trees and other ornamentals. So it's going to be weak, and it's going to be more susceptible to pests. You know, on the right here, I had someone send me this picture and just said they have the prettiest chickweed backyard they've ever seen. I don't think that's really what they wanted, but don't have a lot of grass options for them in this situation right here either because of the dense shade and the orientation of where this particular landscape was. So pests can be a problem. Irrigation. Oops, there's a typo right there on it. So irrigation should have been something other where we won't reduce the amount of irrigation on turf. We will, because there, and timing, Mary Carol touched on this as well, but timing irrigation at night or early morning. An adage we have in turf is don't put your grass to bed wet. disease can occur when you have about 12 hours of favorable environment. Favorable environment for fungi to take cause disease in turf is generally about 12 hours. So if you figure the dew is going to burn off this time of year somewhere, say 9, 10 o'clock, you don't want to be watering your turf, your backyard, underneath the shade sometime before 10 or 12 o'clock at night. You want to early morning, such that that grass will dry out and you have less opportunity for disease to happen. Other things that you can do is improve light penetration, limb up the trees. Again, Mary Carroll touched on some of that. That helps with air drainage. And prune your ornamentals. I've seen many landscapes where the hedges in the back have been opened up or not been pruned back, and as a result, they were very restrictive in light and water. Next slide, please. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rolando to talk to you more about proper irrigation.